Good morning, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. This is episode 785. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is April 25th in the year of the Lord 2017. Remember, we are a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God still is control and he does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studio in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And it looks like the live stream's working. I'm actually putting sound out on the live stream. And for whatever reason, I had the, and this just irks me to no end. I had the Audacity actually working, and for whatever reason, it's not working on my streaming computer again. I had it working like half an hour ago, and I didn't change anything, and I went to put things over to start recording it, and it doesn't want to record. So now I have to put it up on my computer, and hopefully it doesn't stress me out too much. Right now I'm sitting right at 100 or 90 some percent right now, and bouncing back and forth, and I really didn't want to have to do that. I was hoping to have everything set up on the, like I said, I don't believe this. Let me try this one here. See if we can get this coming in. It just doesn't seem to be like it wants to come in. And like I said, I had this working a half an hour before the show, and I do apologize. I wanted this show to go off perfect without a hitch, and whatever reason, it's just not wanting to do that. And I was looking on here, when you're using an open source operating system, the audios are different than everything else, and it's just it amazes me how much different they are. And like I said, I had to set up, it was actually working ahead of time, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. I'm actually using the Audacity on my laptop or on my big computer here. So it's we're just going to have to deal with this the way it is, I guess. I need to reset my desktop up just a hair bit here. Let me do one more thing since I have to do it this way. Let me set this. I'm just getting my audio player set up, and it's so I keep a track on my music and everything. Like I said, right now I'm running at 100% on my lap or on my desktop here. Let me see if I can do something here to lessen that, because I'm not using hardly anything on my streaming computer. I'll see if I'm going to get over there and open up my YouTube channel on my Trying to see what's going on here. Okay. There it is. All right, Dave, you should be getting audio through now. You should. For whatever reason, and I got to figure this out, I had to go back in and just look at the settings on it and get back out, and boom, it started going again, and it was going just a few seconds ago. So I don't know what actually transpired there. Hopefully you'll be getting audio now. And I am recording this digitally, so if I have to, I can replace the audio on the YouTube video, hopefully. I've been having issues with, I'm not a very good video or audio editor when it comes to matching those up. But anyway, so we have, and this has been going throughout the South, folks. This idea of removing history, the Confederate flag flying over the South Carolina Capitol, the Confederate flag in general being taken down, not because it represents a bad part of our history. And the fact of the matter is, it represents American history. These monuments that are being taken down south, including New Orleans, at different universities like Jefferson, at some universities because he was a slaveholder. It embarrasses one particular political party in our country. As far as I'm concerned, it's a part of American history. Good or bad, it's a part of our American history, and we need to deal with it. We need to quit being snowflakes on this whole thing, and we need to deal with it. And so I get so upset because I am a history buff. I get so upset with these folks who want to hide history, and they're doing it for political reasons, folks. There's no other reason for them to be hiding history than for political reasons. The Democrat Party, and Dinesh D'Souza has done some very seminal work on this in his documentaries, especially his last one, Hillary's America. If you haven't seen that, by all means, watch that. And I actually purchased it because it was so good, and I actually want to watch it again. But he lays out through accurate, verifiable historical documents that the Democrat Party has been and still continues to be a racist, segregationist party, even though they want to try to put aside their history. And folks, these monuments in New Orleans, we'll read about them here in a little bit. These are part of the history. Make no mistake about it. These are part of the Democrat Party's history. The Confederacy and all the politicians in the Confederacy were Democrats. The South was controlled by Democrats for many, many years. There were way more Democrats that were slave owners than there were Republicans. And I'm not saying there wasn't any Republicans. Part of the history of slavery in this country that they want to hide from you is that there were a lot of black plantation owners, and actually the first recorded instance of slave ownership in America was by a black man, a black individual there. So, yes, do we have a sordid history? Absolutely we do, but it's our history. And if we do away with our history, we are literally doomed to repeat it. I have stuff in my folder today we're going to talk about real quick today. One, we're going to go over what's called the Overton window. I definitely got to get this into the show today because a lot of people don't know what the Overton window is, and we need to discuss what the Overton window is and to put everything else into perspective here. And then I have a story here by Tim Murphy from motherjones.com, very, very far left liberal biased publication, and that's okay. They can be that. I'm all about free speech here. If they want to put out this type of article, have at it. But folks, the title of the article is Donald Trump has made socialism cool again. Folks, the only way socialism can ever be cool is if we totally destroy and ignore historical facts about socialism. That's the only way it can ever be cool again. Now, today's socialists, those folks that like socialist history, all right, or like being socialists. Put it this: they don't like socialist history. They like being socialists because they like what socialism can give them: free education, free health care, free housing, free food, leisure time for the things they want to do. And this was, and folks, this is nothing new. This is Engels and Marx, Karl Marx and Mr. Engels. And these are their thought processes when it comes to Marxism, communism. And I know I use this on the show, and this isn't original to me, but you talk about protectionism of a country, isolating that country. You talk about fascism, you talk about socialism, you talk about communism. They're all part of the same plant. They're not different things that are separate from one another. They're all part of the same plant. If you want to look at a flowering plant or a tree, you got the roots, you got the trunk. Let's say a tree, you got the roots, you got the trunk, you got the branches, and then you have the leaves. They're all, protectionism, progressivism, fascism, socialism, communism. They're all part of that. They're all one entity. And what's happening is people want to separate these things out. Oh, no. I said socialism doesn't have anything to do with communism. I beg to differ. We have a living example down in Venezuela right now of where socialism goes. And the only way socialism actually works. And to deny this is to deny history. To deny this is actually to deny facts about socialism. So if we do away with our history, we are literally doomed to repeat it, and that's why it's so important. And I'm not tooting my own horn on this, but it's so important that guys like me, folks like I know Dave likes history because his hair's history. It's been history for a long time. We joke back and forth about that. We like history, and matter of fact, I actually have a biblical quote here. Talking about history, Romans chapter 15, verse 4. For whatever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through the patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. There's a lot of people in Christendom today, and there's quite a few folks, I'm sad to say, in the Church of Christ who do not see the benefit of studying the Old Testament. And Paul tells us those things written aforetime were written for our learning. I've learned a lot of Christian principles out of the Old Testament, believe it or not. Matter of fact, you cannot understand the New Testament without going back and starting in the book of Genesis. If you do away with the book of Genesis, you cannot understand the New Testament. You cannot understand Christ. You cannot understand what he's about. You cannot understand, his origins, his beginnings, which he doesn't have them because he is God. But he had a physical beginning here on earth when he was born to the Virgin Mary. And you won't understand these things if you don't go back and start in the book of Revelation and read through the Bible with the intent, with this in your mind, that you're looking for what's called, I have a New American Standard version of the Bible that has some study guides in it, and this one study guide's really good. It's called The Scarlet Thread of Redemption. And it goes from the book of Genesis all the way through the end of the book of Revelation, talking about the scarlet thread of redemption, talking about Jesus Christ and the prophecies and how God used different peoples, countries, political ideologies, the whole nine yards, to make sure that the Messiah would come through the children of Israel, and that there would always be a children of Israel until the Messiah was born into the world and did his redemptive work. And it's a very good study. And so those Christians, I caution you, if you do not read through the Old Testament, do not study the Old Testament, you cannot have a good understanding of the New Testament. I'm sorry. I mean, I've actually talked to people who believe that they know everything they need to know because they have the New Testament. They know everything they need to know when it comes to how to be saved. But in order to be faithful to God and understand what God wants for us, they don't have a complete understanding unless they go back and read all of God's Word, and that includes the Old Testament. Same thing with history, and we'll deal with world history, American history. Over in France, they are rioting over there. I was watching some news clips last night where Le Pen looks like she is going to walk away with that election. I'm not, I'm just saying that right now. I haven't really looked at numbers. I've just been following it on the fringe, as it were, on the outskirts of this story. But people in France are very, very concerned about conservatism. But then I was watching a One American News Network show this morning, the news this morning, and they were talking to a conservative in Germany who's running for the election of the chancellor or prime minister, whatever Merkel is. And he's very conservative, and there's like a groundswell of support for this guy. And the reason why this is going on, folks, is because they understand. Europe is starting to wake up to the fact that liberalism and progressivism and socialism doesn't work. The liberals over in the EU have allowed an invasion to go on that if it continues to go unchecked, there will not be a Europe anymore. It's going to be a caliphate. That's where it's heading. And there's a lot of countries over there that are waking up to this fact. Austria is waking up to this fact. Hungary is waking up to this fact. Hopefully, the UK wakes up to this fact eventually. There's a lot of countries, the Nordic bloc is starting to wake up to this fact because of all the terrorism that's going on up there. And so they see that. And you don't have to go too far back in history to look and see what Islam's all about. And this is crucial, folks. This is crucial. Islam has always been spread by fear and by the sword. That's a fact. That's a historical fact. That's a modern day political fact that is the only way Islam has ever spread. Christianity, true Christianity on the other hand, does not want anything to do with forcing people to believe in God. We share the gospel. We allow the power of the gospel to affect people's lives. And folks, trust me when I tell you this, people never ever stay the same when the gospel is shared with them. They either draw closer to God or they go further away from God. They never stay the same when the true gospel of the New Testament is actually the death, burial, resurrection, and what you need to do to access the redemption that Christ so freely brings. They never stay the same. And there is a huge distinctive difference between other religions of the world and Christianity. And this is something that, over the years that I've come to the conclusion lately, I've been hearing people talk about this in different sources and stuff that I listen to on YouTube and things like that. So not that it's not original to me, but it's not original to them either. This is a biblical thing. Out of all the religions in the world, there's only one that teaches against human nature. Do you know what that religion is? That's Christianity. Out of all the political systems in the world, do you know which one teaches and actually talks about and implemented in their constitution things that go against human nature? You're right. That's the United States Constitution. It's the only document in the world that goes against human nature. For the most part, history of humanity, any freedoms and liberties that the people had were granted to them by the monarchs, by the sovereigns of those countries. In the United States of America, it was quantified in the Constitution and in the thoughts and writings of the founding fathers and the founding generation and the framers of the Constitution that the people are actually sovereign, because without people, you won't have governments. People have always come before governments. States, or counties and everything come before states. States come before the federal government or the national government. And this is something that Democrats don't want you to know about. They don't want you to know the history of the United States. They don't want you to know about the history of the Enlightenment. They don't want you to know these facts that the people are sovereign and the federal government is actually a creation of the states. That's why you have these George Soros groups working so hard against the Convention of the States, because they know in their heart of hearts the truth. They just don't want everybody else to know them. They know that the federal government was set up by the states, and therefore the states set up the charter, which is the United States Constitution. It was not a runaway convention that created the United States Constitution. They were sent there with their commissions The delegates were sent with their commission saying, fix the Articles of Confederation. If it can't be fixed, and I'm loosely paraphrasing this, if it can't be fixed, then it needs to be replaced. And in the looking to fix them, there was just no way to actually fix them, so they had to be replaced. So it wasn't a runaway convention. And even if it was a runaway convention, which I'm not stating it is, and I know it wasn't, you still had to have 3/4 of the states to ratify that Constitution. And yet we have these people that want to rewrite history, these leftists, these globalists like George Soros, and the groups Common Cause and Let America Vote, and some other folks and groups that I'm actually tracing and following that are funded by George Soros. They don't want the people to know the absolute truth about the Constitution, about the Convention of States, and they want to lie about it. They want to tell you that, and trust me, I tell you, if I was being supported by the Koch brothers, I wouldn't be in the financial situation I am right now. This is a grassroots effort, folks. We get with our state representatives, which I only have one, and a state senator, which I only have one of here in Pennsylvania, and I've been emailing them and talking to them about this, that I think we need to go ahead and be part of this Convention of the States. And getting back to my history thing, they don't want people to understand our history. They think, and because of, and this goes back. Another history lesson here, folks, before we launch into the daily Bible reading, stuff like that. This goes back to the Roman Empire. If we can, and there's guys on YouTube like Waters World and Mike Dice that go out and talk to people and ask them these questions about the country, about history, about current events and stuff like that. And the vast majority of people know more about the Kardashians and the housewives, the Real Housewives of New Jersey, which, in my opinion, they're not real housewives. I'm sorry. It's a bunch of drama that goes on, reality TV. But they know more about the popular culture than they do about something that actually affects their lives on a day-to-day basis, like politics, like government, like governance. They know more about that. And this goes back to Roman times. The Roman emperors thought, you know what? If we can give them food, and if we can give them entertainment, we're talking about, they called it circus back then, but it was the gladiatorial games and things like that. If we can distract the people from the government and being governed, we can do what we want. And that's exactly what's happening today. That people are being distracted, allowing themselves to be distracted by the circus that's going on in the entertainment world. And liberals and leftists are happy with that, because if they're being entertained over there and they take all their time up with entertainment and pleasure and vacations and stuff like that, and never give 2 seconds thought about who's governing them, about politics and about laws that are being created that they're probably breaking on a daily basis, then they've won. They've won. So folks, we really, 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 really need to learn our lessons of history. And folks, we are marching through history now. We are literally going through history now. And a lot of people go all their lives not even thinking about that. And they make a very small impact on history, and that's okay. That's okay. I mean, a lot of people, they're okay with that they're not making a huge impact on history. And there's other people that go through history and making a big impact on history, even though that was not their reasoning for doing what they did, like Martin Luther King Jr., folks like that. And then there's other people that go through and they're so narcissistic that they have to be part of history, and they have to craft their legacy, even though they're crafting their legacy goes against the facts and the truth. And we're talking about men like former President Barack Obama. And I say that with a sigh of relief, former President Barack Obama. That is so worried about his place in history. The Democrat Party is so worried about their place in history that they're willing to destroy actual history and the truth about American history to make themselves look good. To make them, and folks, this is exactly what's happening in our country. And it scares me. It scares me how many people do not understand the importance of knowing and understanding our histories. Today's show is being brought to you by Rocky Mountain High Brands. Let me get this over in the picture here. I'm drinking lemonade today. And folks, I do feel a little bit better when I do drink this. It is infused with 100 milligrams of hemp oil. And this actually, it's carbonated, actually tastes like old Fresca. And so right now, if you don't have a local distributor, you can get this on Amazon. And I will be starting up an Amazon store again. I really wasn't understanding what that was before, but I know what it's for now. I'm going to start that up again. And so you can see these products like this, my microphone. I did the whole series on, or not a whole series, but a whole video on my setup on my desk and that. So I'm going to have those products also on there, so you can, if you like what I'm using, you can go right to my store and buy those, and I actually make a little bit of money off of that. This is Rocky Mountain High Brand drinks. Energy drinks is the official drink of the Dan Clements Show. All right, today's daily Bible reading comes from Acts chapter 16, verses 11 through 15. You're going to say, Dan, this is a book that was written almost 2,000 years ago, at least the New Testament. What relevance does it have for us today? A lot. It has a lot, folks. Acts chapter 16, verse 11 through 15. Therefore, sailing from this, we're talking about Paul the Apostle. Therefore, sailing from Troas, we ran a straight course to Samothrace, and the next day came to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the foremost city of that part of Macedonia, a colony. And we were staying in the city for some days, and on the Sabbath day we went out of the city to the riverside where prayer was customarily made, and we sat down and spoke to the women who met there. Now a certain woman named Lydia heard us. She was a seller of purple from the city of Thyatira who worshiped God. The Lord opened her heart to heed the things spoken by Paul, and when she and her household were baptized, she begged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. So she persuaded us. This is a good example of how the gospel was spread in the New Testament. That Paul went to these cities and he sought out people of like mind to pray with them, to sit down and discuss these things with them. And we see that Lydia and her household were baptized. And we don't read in this story or any other conversion story in there, except for one exception, or a couple exceptions, but one of the noted one is Cornelius, where the Holy Spirit was given to them before baptism, but baptism was still required because Peter needed that sign. I don't want to get too far into that story, but this is just another example of why history is important, because this shows us what happened in the New Testament. Today's quote meal comes from John Greenleaf Whittier. Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. He was a poet and did not know it. Well, I like that. Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. And I'm glad, folks, I'm not going to have to look back on my life and say, I could have been a Christian. Or I should have been a Christian at the end of my life. I'm glad that, I had friends like Dave and Al who thought enough of me to share the gospel with me. And, that I don't have that type of regret to live with. And folks, there's going to be a lot of people on the day of judgment that are going to have that regret. That maybe they were shared the gospel and they just refused it. Or maybe they never were shared the gospel and they might have come in contact with a true Christian and that Christian failed to share that with them. I think we all have those type of regrets there. But we need to go through life not having those, what might have been. What might have happened if I'd have shared the gospel with this person. That I actually believe the gospel. All right, and the short Bible lesson today is come from gewatkins.net, Mike Riley, and this is good. Go over and read this, folks. I'll put the link up in the show notes page right after the show. Ignoring the ominous storm clouds won't make the tornado go away. Again, another lesson for us today. Ignoring the storm clouds of this cultural political war that's raging around us won't make the storm or the tornadoes it's producing go away. Just ain't going to happen. All right, I talked at the beginning of the show here about the Overton window. And again, I think this is something we need to understand, and we need to, this is something that is very worthwhile for us to understand. The Overton window, also known as the window of discourse, is a range of ideas the public will accept. It is used by media pundits. The term is derived from its originator, Joseph P. Overton, 1960 to 2003, a former vice president of the Mackinac Center of Public Policy, who in his description of his window claimed that an idea's political viability depends mainly on whether it falls within the window rather than on politicians' individual preferences. According to Overton's description, his window includes a range of policies considered politically acceptable in the current climate of public opinion, which a politician can recommend without being considered too extreme to gain or keep public office. Overton described a spectrum from more free to less free with regard to government intervention, oriented vertically in an axis to avoid comparison with the left or right political spectrum. As the spectrum moves or expands, an idea at a given location or given point in time, folks, may become more or less politically acceptable. Political commentator Joshua Triviano postulated that the degrees of acceptance of public idea are roughly unthinkable, radical, acceptable, sensible, popular, or just policy. The Overton window is an approach to identifying which ideas define the domain of acceptability within a democracy's possible governmental policies. Proponents of policies outside the window seek to persuade or educate the public in order to move and or expand the window. Proponents of current policies or similar ones within the window seek to convince people that policies outside of it should be deemed unacceptable. After Overton's death, others have examined the concept of adjusting the window by the deliberate promotion of ideas outside of it or outer fringe ideas with the intention of making less fringe ideas acceptable by comparison. The door-in-your-face technique of persuasion is similar. Okay, so basically, if you think about the window or pendulum, and you think about, actually, if you just think about the window, how you raise the window up to let air in, and you put it back down to shut the air and elements out, is similar to what they're talking about here in the Overton window. And basically, it goes from like unthinkable to one end to unthinkable to another end. When you're talking about more freedom or less freedom, if you go to the link at Wikipedia, or if you're on a computer right now and you want to look this up, just look up Overton window and go to the Wikipedia. There's a diagram in there. And that diagram, I should have had this actually, let's see here. I don't know if I can save this or not, but let me see if I can try this while I'm actually, but basically the Overton window talks about more freedom, less freedom, if you want to think about it this way. And I'm almost positive that's what Ronald Reagan was talking about, was talking about more freedom and less freedom. And let me get over here and see if I can add a screen to this, and hopefully it doesn't mess things up. Okay, well, let me get back over my Logitech. And it won't do, I can't do it while I'm doing the show, folks. But anyway, I'll have this up, and I'll actually show this graphic again tomorrow. But it goes from more freedom to less freedom, from more freedom being on top, less freedom being on the bottom. And then you have unthinkable on both, and then it comes in radical, acceptable, sensible, popular, and then it goes into policy. What we're seeing today, and this is why the Overton window is so important, what we're seeing today are those ideas that are on the fringe. And we're talking about, basically I'm talking about the less freedom ideas on the fringe, the unthinkable, the radical. What's happening today is they're trying to make socialism acceptable to the masses, which when it comes to more freedom, that's unthinkable, to make socialism more acceptable to the masses. But in order for the folks that have this view about socialism is cool, hey, this is cool being a socialism. Bernie Sanders was cool. That one there, that was hard to actually say without laughing. Bernie Sanders was cool. But what they're trying to do in order to make it more palatable for people, to make it more acceptable or sensible, start moving it towards the center of that window so people can actually see it inside that window. And that's basically what the Overton window is talking about, where you can see it with inside this window. They have to lie about it. They have to obfuscate history or outright just destroy history in order to make their stance more palatable to the public so they can actually put it into policy. And this has happened throughout history, folks. This is a theory that Joseph P. Overton actually put forth, and I think it's a pretty good theory. I haven't heard too many people actually talk against the Overton window theory, but it is, like I said, I believe it to be a very good theory in practice. And so we have today in our society, we have these folks that are trying to do away with history, like the mayor of New Orleans, Mayor Mitch Landrieu. I believe that's Landrieu. I believe is how you almost like Baton Rouge, Landrieu. They're getting rid of these monuments, and let's see here. The thing about this is, folks, this is a pretty radical idea, and people are upset about this to the point. I don't agree with this. I don't think that people should be doing this, but up to the point where there's death threats being put out there against these workers that are taking down these monuments. Workers in New Orleans removed the first of 4 prominent Confederate monuments Monday morning, becoming the latest Southern institution to sever itself from symbols viewed by many as a representation of racism and white supremacy. You don't talk about it being okay. They are representation of that, but they're also our history. Good, bad, or indifferent, they're part of our history. They don't talk about it this way, folks. And this, I'm telling you, it's mostly the leftists and the Democrat Party that are doing this, because if they can get rid of the idea that they are a part of this racism and white supremacy, then more people will vote for them, and the more people vote for them, the more power they have, the more they can do, and the more policies they can implement, like with the socialism. And they don't want you to know about Joseph Stalin. They don't want you to know, even though it was bad what Hitler did with the genocide and the murders and the Holocaust of the Jews, was some 6 million plus. I'm telling you, Nazi Germany and Hitler and the Nazis that were all part of that death program were pikers in compared to Stalin, Mao in China, Pol Pot in Laos or Cambodia. I think it might have been Cambodia, but these dictators, folks, these socialist communistic dictators. Now we have Maduro in Venezuela. That last night it was reported 3 protesters were killed, and you know, if it keeps going this way, there's just going to be many more deaths with that, because we forget our history. The Library Place Monument, which commemorates whites who tried to topple a biracial post-Civil War government in New Orleans, was taken away on a truck in pieces around 5:35 a.m. After a few hours' work. The removal happened early in the morning in an attempt to avoid disruption from supporters who want the monuments to say, some of whom city officials said have been made death threats. Workers who took the monuments down Monday can be seen wearing bulletproof vests, military-style helmets, and scarves to obfuscate their faces. Police were also on hand, including officers who watched the area from atop the parking garage of a nearby hotel. 3 other statues of Confederate Generals Robert E. Lee, P.T. Beauregard, and Confederate States of America President Jefferson Davis will be removed in later days, now that legal challenges have been overcome. There's a better way to use the property. These monuments are on in a way that's better reflects who we are. Okay, we understand you're not that. It's called history, folks. It's called history. And you're destroying your own history. Your children will not learn of these men. Your children will not learn of the struggle of the Civil Wars. You're destroying who you are. You're destroying part of the American culture. And you don't even realize it. And if you do realize it, shame on you. Shame on you. Nationally, debate over the Confederate symbols had become heated since 9 parishioners were killed at a black church in South Carolina in 2015. South Carolina removed the Confederate flag from its state house grounds in the weeks after, and several southern cities have since considered removing monuments. University of Mississippi took down the state flag because it includes the Confederate emblem. New Orleans is a majority African-American city, although the number of black residents have fallen since 2005. Hurricane Katrina drove many people from that city. And let me just say here, again, I used to drive truck. I delivered into New Orleans and the areas around there. And the Democrats in charge of these cities like New Orleans is part of the reason there's a huge black community in there, and part of the reason they were driven out because of the abject poverty that these folks were living in. It's caused by the Democrats. And Dinesh D'Souza in his Hillary's America laid this argument out perfectly, talking about the Democrats are still trying to keep black folks on the plantations that are the inner cities. Just look at the democratically controlled cities in our country and look and see the poverty there compared to conservatively run cities in America. New York City. Used to pick up and deliver New York City all the time. And up until Rudy Giuliani, a conservative Republican mayor, got there, I felt like I was taking my life in my own hands going into the city. And after Giuliani got there, I came back in the city a couple years later after he was in office, and it was a totally, especially the Bronx and Hunts Point Market and other places I used to go to. My brain's not working right now. I used to pick up Eagle Electric over there at the end of the Queensboro Bridge. And anyway, but I used to, they used to be real bad neighborhoods. You literally took your life in your own hand, but it had changed. Now it's slowly going back from what people are telling me, with a succession of either independent like Bloomberg or actual socialists like de Blasio right now. It's actually going backwards again. So I just wanted to make that point. We forget our history. We forget what's going on in our country as far as what, how history affects today. Past is prologue, in other words. People want the Confederate memorials removed, say that they are offensive artifacts honoring the region's slave-owning past, but others call the monuments part of the city's history, and they should be protected historical structures. Robert Bonner, 63, who said he is a Civil War reenactor, was there to protest the statue's removal. I think it's a terrible thing. He said when you start removing the history of the city, you start losing money, you start losing where you came from and where you've been. Since officials announced the removals, contractors hired by the city have faced death threats and intimidation in this deep South city, where passions about the Civil War still run deep. Landrieu refused to say who the city would be using to remove the statues because of the intimidation attempts, and the removal will begin at night to ensure police can secure the sites to protect the workers. Now, can I say this real quick here without getting into too much trouble? If these statutes and these memorials were memorializing something that these Democrats and these leftists actually agreed with, and Republicans and conservatives were out there and removing these, and I'm not saying this is right, I'm just saying these are facts as I see them in today's political atmosphere. And a Republican mayor was there and wanted these monuments removed because they were inaccurate in history or whatever the reasons are. You can bet $1 to the dozen donuts that the contractors' names, the company names would be released, the workers' names and their home addresses would be released, and there would be a lot more violence going on than there is right now. You could bank on that, folks, and that's just an example of the difference between more freedom and less freedom. Those that are for less freedom, and let's face it, folks, it's those on the left. There are some on the right because, the Overton window has a wide window, but there are some on the right that are still on that less freedom type thing. And they are causing a lot of problems in this country. And so I'm just pointing out a difference between the two. One of the other things that I want to talk about here that goes along with this Overton window is something that I've talked about a lot on this show. I've actually stated this to the chagrin of my Republican friends, but one of the reasons why I'm not a Republican anymore is exactly what I'm going to tell you. Republicans actually don't mind government. They don't mind bigger government, and the thing is they want to control government. That's the biggest thing. This article was posted yesterday by Craig Millward of cnsnews.com. And you know what? I forget to do this every now and then. I do apologize about this. These news stories are never original to me. That one about New Orleans was from the Associated Press. That was posted by them, Associated Press, and that was posted yesterday. Today's was on cnsnews.com by Craig Millward, April 24th. AHCA penalty may not be enough to drag folks in the healthcare market. Drag folks into the healthcare market. I thought we were to repeal Obamacare so people weren't being dragged into the healthcare market. I could be wrong. I could be very wrong, but I thought that's what we were about. Representative David Schweikert of Republican Arizona. Speaking on Fox News Sunday morning futures, Representative David Schweikert, Republican Arizona, said we're still not completely sure if the penalty in the GOP healthcare bill is enough to drag folks who believe they're invincible into participating in the healthcare market. What difference is that compared to the actual mandates in Obamacare? Folks, I get so mad about these politicians. Look, if you give people a choice, first, repeal Obamacare outright. Second, you don't need to replace it. Just put some common sense laws into place. If you're going to talk about pre-existing condition, go back to what the state laws were talking about before that I lived under for a long time because of my pre-existing condition with diabetes. That if you go to an individual policy or something like that, there's usually like a 6 or 9 month waiting period before they'll cover your pre-existing condition. That's completely acceptable to me. And it gives me a choice whether I want to get on insurance or not. And if I wait till the last minute when I get sick and get on insurance, I know, and it should be publicized that you're not going to be covered for 6 to 9 months, so you better get on now. There's no penalty. There's no fines for this. To try to drag somebody on, it lets them make that decision whether they want to be on it or not. And so again, tell me how the Republicans are different here. They're just, honestly, folks, I think most Republicans, not all, but most Republicans are a different side of the same governmental coin that is corrupt and likes big government. The only difference between the Democrats and Republicans, which is very little, is when the Republicans in power, they like to govern. But that's no different from the Democrats. When the Democrats in power, they like to govern. And they both like to talk against each other. So when I saw this, and you can't tell I'm livid about this. Are you kidding me? The American Health Care Act, proposed by House Republicans in early March, insurance companies would have to charge people 30% more in premiums for a full year if in the previous year they did not have health insurance for 63 days or longer. And it's talking about a penalty. Okay? I think this is acceptable. If you're going to wait the last minute to get insurance on a pre-existing condition, you should have to pay more. No doubt in my mind. But for the Republicans, for a Republican to come out, can you design in an appropriate penalty, he said? We've already seen the current ACA's model of, hey, there's a lot of penalties if you don't buy and you can't request a waiver. And what we saw in the Ways and Means Committee a month or two ago, one of the Democrats testified that we still have 10.9% of the population going uninsured. Well, 10.9% of the population is what, 36 million people? So there's a lot of noise in the data. The penalty model has not worked. Okay, so we put in a legislation, one that we would have to pay an additional premium by some 1/3 if you weren't carrying insurance. We're still not completely sure that's enough of a penalty to drag folks who believe they're invincible into participating in the healthcare market. Again, trying to put incentives in there to get people in. And if they don't get in, and I do agree, they should have to pay a higher premium. But to state it like this, is it high enough to drag people into this? What does it matter to you? Because I'm telling you what, it doesn't matter to me. What does it matter to you if someone makes a decision they don't want health insurance, whether they got a pre-existing condition or not? And if you have the law set up in such a way and they still don't want health insurance to cover a pre-existing condition, even though maybe they can get it through their job or they can afford it because they're self-employed, whatever it is, and they still don't want it, what does it matter to you? They've made their decision. It's called freedom of choice in this country, folks. They made their decision. And they should have to live with the consequences of that decision. And that's part of the problem today, folks, is we do not live with the consequences of our decisions. We're not forced to live with the consequences of our decision. And that's, to me, that's very, very disturbing. That is very, very disturbing to me. Because I was raised by a very stern, disciplinary father that with actions comes consequences, good or bad. With action comes consequences. For every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction, whether that reaction is good or bad. And in my case, because I was a stubborn son that didn't learn my lesson sometimes the first time, usually those consequences were pretty severe. You know, and you know, I'm not speaking out against my dad. As an adult, as a husband, I agree with corporal punishment. I'm not saying it needs to be used in every case. There's an appropriate response to every action. But folks, the fact of the matter is, if people do not want health insurance, you can't force them to take it. And it should be up to the insurance companies. Quite honestly, it should be up to the insurance companies. And before, the insurance companies had that policy where you had to wait so many months. You could get insurance, but you had to wait so much. Now, if the insurance companies want to add a premium hike to that because you didn't have insurance, you have a pre-existing condition, and you have to wait, you have to pay that premium hike for a year to cover their costs, I think that's pretty acceptable. But for a Republican to say, is the penalty enough to drag people into it? Give me a break. Folks, this is what I'm talking about, folks. This is what I rail against all the time. These government intrusions on our freedoms of choice. It's incredulous that people still support this two-party system where the Republicans, a Republican that makes that statement is no different from a Democrat that supported the ACA, Obamacare. In my mind, they're no different. Where's the freedom? Where's the liberty in that? That's why we don't have an outright repeal right now, because Republicans are afraid of all the false information being put out by the left that people are going to die because they don't have health insurance. And that never was the case, but people believed it because it sounded, if I don't have health insurance, I could die. It sounded plausible. And so people, they heard that. Yeah, that sounds good. I'll vote for that guy. And they go back and start watching the Kardashians or their favorite football or whatever. Just ignore what's going on around them. Again, the Overton window takes place here. It's within the window, the plausibility of that statement is within that Overton window, whether it's on the side of less freedom or more freedom, it's within there. So, it's sensible. We'll make a policy on it and we'll go about our lives. Where guys like me who are constitutionalists and members of the Constitution Party, and our ideas fall outside of that, especially on the more freedom side, fall outside of that window. We got to do a lot of educating of folks. We got to actually talk about history. What the founding fathers were talking about around when it come time to frame the Constitution or to form the country, the states, the counties, the municipalities, and then the states forming the federal government. We have to go back in history and learn about all that stuff. We have to teach that stuff to folks because folks aren't being taught that in their schools, and there's a reason for that. And we see that with this mayor. If we don't know our history, then we can't fight against those in the future who are trying to destroy our history, to be quite frank with you. So anyway, let's see here. I only got a couple. Let's see how much time I got left. I got a little over 2 minutes. I don't have a lot of time. Real quick here. I got to get, I want to do two things real quick here. Bill Nye, he's been a stick in my craw for a long time. Bill Nye makes a false claim about the U.S. Constitution. He was talking about on Earth Day. He says if you suppress science, if you pretend climate change isn't a real problem, you will fall behind other countries that do invest in science, that do invest in basic research. He told CNN on Saturday during the March for Science. He goes, it's interesting to note, I think that Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution refers to the progress of science and useful arts, Nye said. Useful arts in the 18th century usage would be what we call engineering or city planning or architecture, Nye said. Nye's use of the government argument before to underscore how unpatriotic it is to have the federal government hand out billions of taxpayer dollars to universities, corporations, and research institutions. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says the government shall promote progress in science and useful arts, Nye told Vox in 2015. Of course, Vox didn't correct him. Real quick here. The Constitution reads, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. The copyright clause has nothing to do with government-funded science, but everything to do with establishing a legal framework to protect intellectual property rights. And as far as I can tell, Bill Nye has no intellectual property. He just doesn't. I don't know why. I don't know why people will still listen to this guy. I really don't. So let me leave you with just this one thing. I just wanted to get to this. Breaking news from the White House, folks. Sean Spencer, Trump's tax records are now available in a safe place for all to see. CNN reporter asked where they at. And Sean Spencer said they're underneath Obama's college records, birth records, passport application, his immigration status as student, his funding sources, bank accounts, his college records, his selective service registration, and Hillary's income lines of $66,000 in the city. It's been the Dan Clemens Show. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. We'll see you tomorrow. God bless and have a good day.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio.